The vehicle wasn't cold. That was the first thing the operator noticed. Not a sound, not a movement. Just a hand pressed flat against a bonnet in the dark, and the warmth coming back through the palm of a gloved hand. An engine that had been running within the last 20 minutes. In the dark on the western fringe of Fallujah, in the early hours of a night in March 2004, a warm engine meant one thing. Somebody had just left. The breach team was already on the door. 4 operators, weapons up, breathing slow, stacked against the wall of a compound that Task Force Black had spent 6 weeks locating. The surveillance drone overhead had been watching this building for 11 hours. No movement in, no movement out. Everything the intelligence said was correct. Everything pointed to tonight, to this building, to the man who was supposed to be inside it. The signal came. They moved. The building was cleared in under 4 minutes. 6 rooms. One terrified family pressed against a back wall. Weapons, documents, a mobile phone on a plastic table, screen still lit, last call placed 18 minutes ago. And a mattress in the main room still warm to the touch. He had been here. 20 minutes ago, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, the most wanted man in Iraq, had been in this room. 20 minutes. That is the number that military historians go quiet over when they encounter it. Not an hour, not a day. 20 minutes separated that night in Fallujah from a version of history in which the most catastrophic insurgency of the early 21st century was ended in 2004, rather than grinding on for 8 more years. 20 minutes of lag time in the intelligence cycle. 20 minutes that cost thousands of lives. But here is what makes this story more than a near miss. It is not just the story of how close they came. It is the story of what that 20-minute gap revealed about the entire coalition's approach to counter-network warfare, and how that revelation eventually produced the machine that ran 70 raids in 6 weeks and killed Zarqawi on a June night in 2006. The warm mattress in Fallujah was not just a failure, it was a lesson, one of the most expensive lessons in the history of modern special operations. This is the story of how it happened, why it happened, and what those 20 minutes ultimately taught the men who would eventually close the gap for good. To understand what Task Force Black was hunting in the spring of 2004, you have to understand what Zarqawi had already built, and what he was in the process of constructing when those SAS operators pressed their palms against that warm bonnet in the dark. Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was not a product of al-Qaeda's founding generation. He was something older and in some ways more dangerous. A self-made jihadist who had constructed his ideology and his organization independently, answerable to no one, operating according to his own strategic logic. Born Ahmed Fadil al-Nazil al-Khalele in the Jordanian city of Zarqa in 1966, he had been a street criminal before prison gave him religion and ambition in roughly equal measure. He had gone to Afghanistan. He had run his own camp. And by the time American tanks crossed the Iraqi border in March 2003, he had an organization, a strategy, and a clarity of purpose that bin Laden himself found both useful and troubling. That strategy was, at its core, a theory of collapse, not military defeat of the coalition. Zarqawi was too pragmatic to believe that was achievable. His target was Iraq's social fabric. His method was sectarian atrocity at industrial scale. His goal was to push Sunni and Shia into a civil war so complete and so vicious that the country would tear itself apart, and in the chaos, an al-Qaeda-lined Sunni state would emerge from the ruins. By the spring of 2004, that strategy was working. Car bombings in Baghdad were not occasional events. They were weekly operational output, planned, coordinated, designed not just to kill but to terrify and to provoke. The assassination of Iraqi police and government officials was running at a pace designed to make governance impossible. Checkpoints were being hit. Convoys were being ambushed. And the pattern of attack was not random, it was calibrated, with each wave of violence designed to produce a specific reaction from the Shia community that would then justify the next wave of Sunni provocation. And Zarqawi's propaganda operation was, by early 2004, a strategic instrument in its own right. The execution videos, the orange jumpsuits, the cameras, the carefully produced footage were not just intimidation. They were recruitment drives aimed at radicalized young men across the Arab world who were watching on internet forums and making decisions. The hostage murders served a dual function. They pressured Western governments and they demonstrated to potential recruits that AQI was serious, capable, and unafraid. By March 2004, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi had become the single most dangerous individual in the Iraq War, not because of what he had done, because of what he was about to do. The worst was still ahead. The First Battle of Fallujah in April 2004, where AQI fighters transformed the city into a fortress that would take the Americans 2 brutal months to recapture. The Samarra Mosque bombing in February 2006, which brought Iraq to the edge of civil war in a single morning. The systematic sectarian killing campaign that made Baghdad streets run with blood through 2006. All of it was being planned, financed, and directed by a man who was, in the spring of 2004, still alive and operational, and who had just apparently walked out of a building in western Fallujah 20 minutes before an SAS assault team came through the door. The coalition knew this, which is why the intelligence trail that led to that building in March 2004 had been the highest priority counterterrorism operation running in the entire Iraq theater. Task Force Black had been in Iraq since the autumn of 2003. One SAS Sabre squadron, roughly 60 operators, working out of a compound in Baghdad whose exact location has never been officially confirmed, alongside American counterparts from Delta Force under the command architecture of JSOC, the Joint Special Operations Command. The intelligence trail that led to Fallujah in March 2004 had begun 6 weeks earlier with a signals intelligence tip, a phone number used once. That connected a known Zarqawi associate to a location on the western edge of Fallujah. The associate was a mid-level facilitator, someone who moved money, equipment, and personnel between AQI cells across Anbar province. Not a senior figure, not a target in himself, but a thread. The thread was pulled. The associate's movements were placed under surveillance. His phone was monitored by NSA collection assets operating in the theater. Over 12 days, a pattern emerged: regular visits to a compound that did not appear in any coalition database, on a schedule irregular enough to suggest deliberate counter-surveillance awareness. The compound was not visited on the same day of the week. The visit times varied between afternoon and late evening. The route taken to reach it was different each time. This was not coincidence. This was tradecraft. The compound was flagged and elevated within the intelligence system. A formal request for additional collection was processed, more drone coverage, more signals monitoring. A request to the CIA station in Baghdad for any human intelligence that might place a known figure at the location. The human intelligence request produced nothing immediately. But the drone coverage, running over the next 10 days, captured footage of a second individual entering the compound on 2 separate occasions. An individual who, when the footage was analyzed by a specialist imagery unit, was assessed with medium confidence as matching the physical description of Zarqawi himself. Medium confidence is not actionable on its own. The imagery analysis was passed to a human source handler within the CIA's Baghdad station, who passed it to a source, someone with access to the network at a level the technical collection couldn't provide. whose identity has never been confirmed in the public record. That source, according to later accounts, reportedly confirmed that the compound was being used by senior AQI figures and that Zarqawi had been present there. The target package was built. The operation was planned. Task Force Black prepared for what every operator on the assault team understood was potentially the most significant raid since the start of the war. Here is where the fault line that would define the next 2 years of the Iraq War becomes visible. The intelligence cycle that produced the Fallujah target package had taken 6 weeks. 6 weeks from the first signal's tip to an actionable target location. In a network like Zarqawi's, where senior figures moved on irregular schedules, changed locations regularly, and communicated through couriers for anything sensitive, 6 weeks was an enormous exposure window. The intelligence that was current in week 1 might be stale by week 4. The location that was accurate in week 5 might be vacated by week 6. The network moved faster than the intelligence cycle chasing it, and everyone in the coalition's special operations architecture knew it. The question was what to do about it. The insertion on the night of the operation was by ground vehicle rather than helicopter. Fallujah in the spring of 2004 was a city where helicopter insertions drew fire reliably. AQI had positioned observers who monitored approach routes and could warn a target building in time to move, or prepare if a helicopter was heard coming. The operational security assessment was that a ground approach, moving through the city in unmarked vehicles at the same pace as civilian traffic, was less likely to produce a warning to the target. The team moved through the city in the early hours, through streets empty and dark, past checkpoints that had been quietly coordinated with Iraqi security in advance. The surveillance drone had been watching the compound for 11 hours. Nothing had moved. No vehicles had approached or departed since the previous afternoon. The intelligence appeared solid. They reached the compound at 2:20. The outer perimeter was secured without incident. The breach team moved to the door, and one operator, checking a vehicle parked inside the courtyard wall as a matter of routine, pressed a hand against the bonnet. 20 minutes. He was 20 minutes gone. Before we go further into what the near miss meant and what it set in motion, you need to understand why the SAS, specifically, why Task Force Black was the unit running this operation. Because the answer to that question is also the answer to why the 20-minute gap was eventually closed. The Special Air Service had been doing this longer than almost anyone. Not this specific operation, not hunting terrorist network leaders in urban Iraq, but the underlying work, the patient development of intelligence, the counter-network methodology, the application of surgical force to complex targets in environments where mistakes had consequences beyond the tactical. The crucible was Northern Ireland. For over 2 decades, the SAS ran covert operations against the Provisional IRA and other Republican paramilitary organizations in conditions that were, in several critical respects, harder than anything Iraq presented. They were operating in a democratic country with a free press and legal oversight. They were targeting an enemy deeply embedded in civilian communities with its own sophisticated intelligence apparatus and its own counter-surveillance operations. They couldn't hit hard and move on. Every operation had to be precise, legally defensible, and intelligence-driven. What they developed in Northern Ireland was not just tactical skill. It was an institutional methodology for counter-network warfare that had no direct equivalent in any other military organization. They learned to treat every raid as an intelligence collection event, to see the target building not as the endpoint of an operation, but as the starting point for the next one. They learned to extract and process intelligence product with a speed that allowed follow-on operations to launch within hours rather than days. They also learned something harder to articulate but equally important: patience combined with urgency. The patience to develop intelligence properly, to wait for the right moment, to resist the pressure to act before the picture was complete, and the urgency to act the moment the picture was complete, without the planning and approval delays that conventional military doctrine built into the process. The key metric was exploitation speed. When the SAS cleared a building, the intelligence value of what they found, phones, laptops, documents, pocket litter, was extracted and processed on site before the helicopter was back in the air. Not in days, not in hours, in the time it took to drive back to the compound. The next target could begin taking shape before the dust from the current raid had settled. By 2004, this was still faster than the American exploitation cycle, even with all the American resources behind it. The American system had a structural lag built into it, a planning and approval process designed for conventional military operations that added days to a cycle that needed to run in hours. McChrystal understood this and was pushing to fix it. The SAS had been operating without that lag for 20 years. The British brought the doctrine. The Americans had the architecture. In Fallujah in March 2004, the doctrine was right and the architecture was almost fast enough. Almost. The raid itself, the mechanics of it, the breach and the clearance and the exploitation, went as well as any Operation Task Force Black had run since deployment. The insertion was clean. The perimeter was secured without incident. The breach team hit both entry points simultaneously at 2:20, and the building was secured in under 4 minutes. 3 people inside. 2 surrendered immediately. Family members, not fighters, pressed against the back wall with their hands visible before the operators had finished clearing the corridor. The 3rd was found in a back room, also unarmed, also compliant. The building was confirmed clear, no armed resistance, no contact, no shots fired, no wounded operators, a clean tape. Except for the thing that wasn't clean at all. The exploitation of the building told a story that the assault team had already begun to read from the moment the bonnet check came back warm. The phone on the plastic table in the main room. Last call placed 18 minutes before the breach. The call had been outgoing, placed from this number to a number that, when cross-referenced against the NSA's signals intelligence database later that morning, connected to an AQI facilitator operating in the Diyala province. A routine coordination call, the kind of call you make when you're about to move to a new location. The mattress in the main room, still warm. The intelligence team's assessment, based on residual heat and the ambient temperature of the building, was that it had been vacated within 30 minutes of the breach. Possibly less. The room was not hot, and the mattress temperature was already declining. The documents found in a leather satchel near the rear door, the door that opened onto the back of the compound, toward the alley that ran between this building and the next, were movement-related. Safe house locations in 3 different districts, vehicle descriptions, including a specific make and color that did not match the vehicle in the courtyard whose bonnet was warm. The kind of material you prepare when you're planning to be somewhere else by morning. The rear door itself was unlocked from the inside. No bolt drawn, no resistance. A door that someone had passed through recently enough that it had not yet been secured by whoever remained in the building. He had known they were coming. Or he had moved by routine, on the irregular schedule he maintained specifically to prevent surveillance from establishing a pattern. The distinction barely mattered. Either way, he was gone. The question of whether Zarqawi had been warned, whether the 6-week intelligence development process had been compromised at some point, whether the human source had reported back to the network, whether the compound's occupants had managed to communicate before the perimeter was secured, has never been definitively answered. Mark Urban, whose book Task Force Black remains the most detailed public account of SAS operations in Iraq during this period, reconstructs the near miss as most likely a product of routine movement rather than a security breach. Zarqawi moving on schedule before any warning arrived. But the uncertainty was never fully resolved. What is not in dispute is the timing. 18 minutes on the phone's call log, 30 minutes or less on the mattress temperature assessment. The vehicle in the courtyard warm enough to be felt through a gloved hand. The rear door unlocked. Everything pointed to the same window. 20 minutes, give or take, between his departure and the breach team's arrival. The exploitation team worked the building for 90 minutes after the clearance was complete. The phone and its complete data, contact list, call history, SMS records went into the analytical system. The documents from the leather satchel were photographed and transmitted before the team extracted. The vehicle was checked thoroughly. No identification documents, no communications equipment, fuel tank half full. A vehicle prepared for a short journey. The machine kept running. But the man it was hunting had slipped through again, by the smallest margin the intelligence record had ever recorded. The intelligence from the Fallujah building did not stop being useful because the primary target had escaped. The phone produced 37 contact numbers, 11 of which were new to the NSA's collection database. Of those 11, 7 were attributed to known AQI figures within 48 hours of the raid. 3 of those 7 were located to specific addresses in Baghdad and Anbar province within the following week. 2 of those 3 were hit in Task Force Black operations in the 10 days following the Fallujah near miss. The documents from the leather satchel produced 4 safe house addresses. 2 were confirmed as current through subsequent surveillance operations. 1 was hit 6 days after the Fallujah raid. A mid-level AQI logistics coordinator captured alive, his phone producing a further chain of 14 contacts. The other confirmed safe house was empty when hit, another cold site, another location that had been vacated hours before the breach team arrived, though not by 20 minutes this time, by 2 days. The vehicle description from the documents was circulated through the coalition's intelligence system. A vehicle matching the description, same make, same color. A plate number that matched one of the partial plates in the document was picked up by aerial surveillance in the Adhamia district of North Baghdad 3 days after the Fallujah raid. The vehicle was placed under surveillance for 48 hours. It led to a building. The building was assessed as a probable AQI command node. Task Force Black hit it 10 days after Fallujah. The target was not Zarqawi. The vehicle surveillance had not produced intelligence placing him at this location. But the building contained 2 individuals who appeared on the coalition's most wanted list at positions 12 and 17. Both were taken alive. The intelligence from that building fed 3 further operations over the following month. The near miss in Fallujah had, paradoxically, produced one of the most productive intelligence hauls of the first year of Task Force Black's Iraq deployment. It just hadn't produced the man they came for. The Fallujah near miss of March 2004 was not an isolated event. It was one of at least 3 occasions during 2003 and 2004, when Coalition Special Operations Forces came within striking distance of Zarqawi and missed him by margins that the intelligence community later assessed as critically small. On at least one other confirmed occasion, a vehicle believed to be carrying him was tracked by aerial surveillance for over 40 minutes and then lost when it entered a district where drone coverage had a gap that, according to later analysis, was approximately 4 kilometers wide and 12 minutes deep at the vehicle's travel speed. 4 kilometers, 12 minutes, 20 minutes in Fallujah. The near misses were not random. They were a symptom of a specific structural problem. The gap between when intelligence became actionable and when action could be taken was consistently just wide enough for Zarqawi to move through. Each near-miss was, in its own way, instructive. They told the intelligence community something important about how Zarqawi operated at the operational security level. He was not hiding in the conventional sense. He was not in a bunker, not in a remote desert location, not surrounded by an overwhelming security detail that would have been visible to surveillance. He was moving, constantly, unpredictably, on a schedule that seemed deliberately designed to ensure that no surveillance pattern could be established. He changed locations every few days, sometimes every day. He communicated through couriers for anything sensitive: operational planning, movement coordination, financial instructions. His use of phones was minimal and disciplined. Short calls from phones used only once, then discarded. The phone on the table in Fallujah was a relative breach of that discipline. A phone that had accumulated a call history over multiple days. Whether that breach was the result of complacency or operational necessity has never been established. He trusted very few people with his current location at any given time. The circle of individuals who knew where he was sleeping on any given night was, by the intelligence community's assessment, probably fewer than 5 people at most. Each one of those 5 represented a potential exposure point, but each one of those 5 also represented a potential penetration target, if coalition intelligence could identify and develop them. The warm mattress in Fallujah was evidence that Zarqawi's operational security, while exceptional, was not perfect. He had been there. He had used a phone that retained a call history. He had left documents in a bag near a door. The gaps existed. The question was whether the machine chasing him could be made fast enough to exploit them. The night of the near-miss had a secondary consequence that matters for the broader story of the Iraq War. The intelligence taken from the compound in Fallujah, particularly the phone, fed directly into the targeting cycle that Task Force Black was running through 2004. Several of the contacts extracted from that device were tracked and eventually hit in operations over the following weeks. The network around Zarqawi was being eroded, even if Zarqawi himself remained out of reach. More significantly, the near-miss accelerated a change in how JSOC approached the entire campaign. General McChrystal, commanding the Joint Special Operations Command, had been pushing for a faster, more integrated intelligence operations cycle since he took command in 2003. The Fallujah near-miss, the most vivid demonstration yet of what 20 minutes of lag time in the intelligence cycle could cost, sharpened that urgency to a point. McChrystal's response was not to run a post-incident review and file a report. It was institutional. He pushed harder for the signals intelligence processing architecture that would eventually allow phone exploitation results to flow into the targeting system within minutes rather than hours. He pushed harder for the co-location of intelligence analysts with operational planning teams. So the gap between intelligence arriving and targeting decisions being made was measured in the length of a walk down a corridor rather than the length of a staffing process. He pushed for the exploitation timeline to be treated as an operational metric, tracked and measured and improved the same way that any other operational performance metric was tracked. The lesson was brutal and simple. The gap between intelligence and action had to close, not from days to hours, from hours to minutes. The warm mattress was evidence that even a well-planned, well-executed operation could arrive 20 minutes too late if the intelligence cycle wasn't fast enough. Over the following 2 years, McChrystal built the machine that would eventually run the cycle fast enough. The same machine that, in the summer of 2006, would execute 70 raids in 6 weeks and unravel Zarqawi's network from the inside. The same machine that, on the night of June 7, 2006, put two F-16s over a compound near Hibhib and ended the hunt for good. But in March 2004, in a compound on the western edge of Fallujah, that outcome was still 2 years away. The mattress was warm. The vehicle engine was warm. The phone on the table was still showing a recent call. And Abu Musab al-Zarqawi was somewhere in the dark city, already gone, already moving, already beyond reach by exactly 20 minutes. There is a version of the Iraq War in which the near miss in Fallujah is the pivotal moment. The night that, if it had gone differently by 20 minutes, changed everything. No Samarra mosque bombing. No slide toward civil war in 2006. No years of sectarian killing that produced the conditions from which ISIS eventually emerged. That version of history is a tempting one. But it is probably too simple. Zarqawi was one man in a movement that had structural causes: the de-Baathification policy, the dissolution of the Iraqi army, the sectarian fault lines that Saddam had suppressed for decades, and that the invasion cracked open. Removing him in 2004 would have degraded the network significantly. Whether it would have prevented the civil war dynamics that emerged in 2005 and 2006 is a different question. AQI had other capable commanders. The ideology outlived any individual. The conditions that produced the movement were not dependent on one man. What the near miss does tell us, clearly, without ambiguity, is that the intelligence cycle matters as much as the tactical execution. An assault team can be perfectly trained, perfectly inserted, perfectly positioned, and still arrive 20 minutes too late if the system feeding them intelligence isn't fast enough. The gap between knowing and doing is where wars are won and lost, not in the firefights themselves. McChrystal took that lesson and built an institution around it. The Find Fix Finish Exploit Analyze Loop, the continuous 24-hour machine tempo operation that eventually dismantled Zarqawi's network in the summer of 2006, was partly a direct institutional response to the reality that 20 minutes of lag time had kept the most wanted man in Iraq alive for 2 additional years. The operators who cleared that compound in March 2004 went back to their vehicles, back to Baghdad, back to the planning cycle. No extended debrief about what might have been. No pause in the operational tempo. The exploitation intelligence was processed. New leads were identified. The machine kept running because it had to keep running. Because the alternative, accepting that the gap was permanent, was not acceptable. 2 years and 3 months later, the machine ran fast enough. The gap closed. The 70 raids unraveled the network that had protected Zarqawi. And on a June evening in 2006, in a palm grove north of Baghdad, the hunt that had started with a warm bonnet in Fallujah finally ended. The mattress cooled. The phone went into an evidence pouch. The assault team drove back to Baghdad in the dark. He left that house 20 minutes before they got there. It was the last time he would be that lucky.